I'd like to present you our research regarding the implementation of pre-deconstruction audits in Germany, insights into an empirical survey and further refinement of information requirements. It's a very German-specific topic, but I see a lot of German researchers in the audience, so it's very interesting for them, hopefully. Nevertheless, maybe also interesting for the other people around. I would spare you explaining the necessity why we should reuse or recycle more construction products, but I will tell you more about how to identify construction products suitable for subsequent usage. And in recent years, the term pre-deconstruction audit or pre-demolition audit has been established for this kind of audit process prior to a demolition or a deconstruction of a building. And you go into a building and identify the construction products or materials suitable for subsequent usage. And there are preliminary publications on this topic. For example, in Germany, the Dienstspec 91484, or on EU level, the European Construction Demolition Waste Management Protocol, or the Levels 2.2 indicator. And those publications display possible procedural applications of such audits and also display possible information requirements, therefore. However, at least for Germany, and I think also EU-wide, there's currently still a lack of insight into the actual practical implementation of such audits, and also there's a shortage of evaluations of those previously published information requirements. So that's basically the starting point for our research. In our research, you can find insights into the status quo of PDAs in Germany, and we also took existing information requirements, evaluated them, and further refined them. So regarding our methodology, like I said, we're giving a status quo of the PDAs in Germany, and we're doing this on the one side through a literature-based approach. So we did an unsystematic review on purpose because there's almost no research literature about it right now. And we're giving an overview regarding the history of PDAs, current developments in Germany and an EU level. And we also accompanied that with practical insights, which we gathered through 21 expert interviews with a variety of stakeholders and also 3 accompanied field surveys. So we accompanied 2 PDAs and also a follow-up inspection of hazardous pollutants. And based on that, we did a qualitative content analysis according to Kuckertz and Rädiker. And in this qualitative survey, we already noticed a lot of the experts saying that they are not so happy with the Dienstspec 91484, even though it's kind of the standard. It's not a real standard, it's just a Dienstspec, but it's like commonly, widely used in Germany, apparently. And this was the starting point for us to take the information requirements from the Dienstspec 91484 and further evaluate and refine them. So we took the findings from our QCA and modified the Dienstspec information requirements, more on that later. And then we basically had an iterative specification process. So we gathered all the information requirements in a large Excel sheet, also more on that later. And then we had various discussions with our DeconDB project partner, Knepper, and also validated and reflected those information requirements upon the PDA we did of our project demonstrator. It's the former machine house at the power plant site Boxberg near the Polish border. So it's a 500-meter long building with a lot of potential for subsequent usage. Maybe not that much reuse, but maybe more recycling, but still possible scenarios for subsequent usage. And you can also see a few pictures of us taking samples. Like the material samples are currently being analyzed, and we also took a few like disassembly probes because we saw initial potential from those Villeroy and Boch tiles. It's commonly a very famous company in Germany, but the tile glue was just too sticky, so we couldn't get it off in an economical way, just as a short side note. And we concluded our research with a discussion of the results and also further suggestions for a software-based implementation. And I would like to show you a few results of our research. So regarding the DIN spec 91484, only one expert stated actually using it as a basis for his PDA. Most of the experts work in relation to it or follow their own procedures. A lot of them seem or deem the DIN spec not sufficiently aligned with actual practical processes. For example, they say that the initial assessment should first focus on determining the potential for subsequent usage, therefore avoiding any unnecessary data collection, making the process more uneconomical. And a lot of experts also emphasize that it's not specific in some areas. Relevant parameters to practice are missing, and the relevance of certain parameters is also unclear. And if you've taken a look into the DIN spec 91484, you might have also come to the same conclusion. There's often a general lack of knowledge about how to complete those parameters. So all these insights, found their place in the refinement. On the next slide, I will show you more about that. I also brought along a few excerpts regarding the topic of PDA on an EU level. So the European Construction Demolition Waste Management Protocol and the levels 2.2 indicator that are actually largely unfamiliar, even though the topic is rising, because if you were to do an EU taxonomy conform PDA, you would need to tackle those framework documents. However, one of the interviewed experts from a large German deconstruction association, she stated that the topic is rising among banks and insurers. So we'll see how that will develop. And I also brought along an interesting fact regarding the knowledge needed for conducting PDAs. The experts stated or emphasized that implicit knowledge dominates the decision-making process. So it is, for example, needed to have product-specific knowledge about hazardous pollutants and so on. And you definitely need to know the market understandings and needs to determine the subsequent usage potential. So regarding the PDA information requirement, like I said, we gathered everything in long Excel sheets, and you can get those Excel sheets in our Zenodo repository, and we highlighted all the changes we made in Peach and also gave explanatory notes in red to understand why we took those changes. And now a few excerpts of the changes we made. Of course, we changed the sequence of the data fields to allow a more economical process. So you now start with an initial subsequent usage potential assessment. And if there's subsequent usage potential, then you fill out the other parameters, thus allowing a more efficient economical procedure. Certain data fields and value parameters were added and modified according to the needs of the practice. For example, deconstruction methods were added and the parameter fields for accessibility were changed because it didn't make so much sense. And we gave a lot of extensive explanatory notes and also predefined value parameters to eliminate any ambiguity when filling out those parameters. And if you were to plan corresponding reporting according to European Construction Demolition Waste Management Protocol or levels 2.2, we also give the needed parameters. So we chose the path of creating an Excel tool because we wanted to create something that has a low barrier in usage, but of course it could also form the starting point for software-based implementation. And to do so, we gathered more suggestions for software-based implementation or even an improvement of existing tools. And I just brought along a few. Most of the experts, they were very critical about developing a tool because they said they see it very difficult to create something that is actually practical, that provides guidance and doesn't lose like the needs of the practice in field. So that is definitely a big concern when creating a tool. A lot of them also stated basic function, of course, would be taking images, but also modifying them. For example, adding dimension chains and so on. Adaptive data fields, copy function, dictation function are very clear that allow a more faster data entry in field. Also, a further knowledge transfer support function could further eliminate any ambiguity when filling out the parameters. And a few experts stated that an automated image recognition of construction products could also further enhance the economical PDA assessment. And I already saw some research going into that direction in the EC3 proceedings, so very cool to see. And I come to my last slide. Just a few excerpts of our conclusions. So with our research, we give a general insight into the current PDA developments in Europe and Germany. I think we're the first to give a comprehensive practical perspective of PDAs in Germany, and our PDA information requirements are free to use for everyone. So feel free to implement them in practice or in further research. And however, we also have a few limitations. So our qualitative survey could have been more comprehensive. The sample sizes of some stakeholder groups might be considered too small. Also, the validation reflection took only place with one project partner. So broader validation would reduce the subjectivity of our research. And of course, the PDA information requirements should be extensively tested in real-world practice. It could be transformed into a formal data model or ontology, thus allowing a better software implementation. Last sentence of mine, my further studies will dive more into the topic of how we can actually formalize the decision-making process and thus support the assessment process. Thank you very much for your attention. Feel free to ask me any questions.
I have two questions regarding the expert you included in the questionnaire.
Yeah.
First, do you have insights why they